Hello. Thanks for joining me. Last night we went and listened to William Federer talk about the advent of socialism, kind of compared to its history and what's going on today. But one of the topics that he first addressed was, has there ever been fraud in our elections, and did it actually result in the election of one person over another? So, I think you'll find this next section very interesting.
Well, I have a PowerPoint, and I'm going to go through some of it with you tonight. And I send out a daily email. It's called American Minute. And let's see, I think I'm supposed to go into the presenter mode. Is that it? Maybe this is it. And so it's something that happened on each date in American history. You can sign up at AmericanMinute.com. And I did one on landslide Lyndon. So if you're not familiar with that, so this is my book. It's called a new book. It's called Socialism: The Real History from Plato to the Present. And the subtitle is How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But this is landslide Lyndon. So on September 2nd, 1948, Lyndon Baines Johnson ran in the Democrat primary for the U.S. Senate against Democrat Texas Governor Coke Stevenson. Coke Stevenson was more popular and would have won, but there was a notorious ballot irregularities to steal the election. Mysteriously, on the night of the election, a box of uncounted ballots was discovered in the South Texas town of Alice in Jim Wells County, precinct number 13, which happened to be the area that Lyndon Johnson was from. Confusion reigned in Texas for the entire week. And by the end of the week, LBJ won by 87 votes. Both sides accused the other of voter fraud. The FBI, Postal Department, and other agencies were investigated. Piecing together the details, the story emerged that during the tabulation period, LBJ's campaign manager, John B. Connally, traveled to Alice, Texas in Jim Wells County. George Parr, the Duke of Duval, the wealthy political boss of Jim Wells County and neighboring Duval County, gave John Connally access to be present when the ballots were, quote unquote, counted and the returns amended. George Parr later committed suicide. Sometimes they use the term suicided when it's an involuntary suicide. Anyway, when the dust settles, the newly recounted ballots showed an additional 202 additional ballots, some of whom were deceased and buried in the local cemetery or were absent from the county on election day. These voters had supposedly lined up in alphabetical order at the last minute, signed in the same blue ink, in the same handwriting, and all cast their ballots for LBJ. The New York Times actually ran an article decades later. Ex-official says he stole 1948 election for Johnson. The New York Times published an article, July 30th, 1977, and the disclosure was made by Louis Salas, who was the election judge for Jim Wells County's Box 13, which produced just enough votes in the 1948 Texas Democrat primary runoff to give Johnson the party's nomination for the United States Senate. Johnson did not win that election. It was stolen for him, and I know exactly how it was done, said Mr. Salas, now a lean, white-haired 76-year-old. George P. Parr, the South Texas political leader, whom Mr. Salas served for a decade, shot and killed himself April of 1975. Mr. Johnson is dead, and so is his opponent. Mr. Salas said that he decided to break his silence in a quest for peace of mind. So he said, I was just going along with my party. He said Mr. Parr ordered that 200-odd votes be added to Mr. Johnson's total from Box 13. Mr. Salas said he had seen the fraudulent votes added in alphabetical order and had them certified then as authentic and on an order from Mr. Parr. Parr was the godfather. He could tell any election judge, give us 80% of the vote and the other guy 20%. We had to make it in every election. The New York Times article continued. The Associated Press interviewed a former agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, T. Kellis Dibrell. Mr. Dibrell said also, the last 202 names were made with the same colored ink in the same handwriting, whereas the earlier names in the polls list were written by different individuals with different colored inks. The final statewide count, including the Box 13 ballots, gave Mr. Johnson an 87-vote margin, earning him the tongue-in-cheek nickname Landslide Lyndon. The Democrat Central Committee was deadlocked 28-28 on whether or not to certify the questionable election results. John Connolly, who was the campaign manager, persuaded Frank W. Mayborn, publisher of the Temple Daily Telegram, to cut short a business trip in Nashville and return to cast the deciding committee vote to certify the election results. LBJ turned to help to Washington attorney and former FDR appointee Abe Fortas. Abe Fortas persuaded Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, who was appointed by FDR, to intervene. You know Hugo Black because he's the one who came up with the separation of church and state decision. And anyway, on September 28th, 1948, Justice Black overturned the lower court ruling, letting the decision of the Johnson-Koch-Stevenson race rest with the Texas Democrat Central Committee. In return for his favor, Abe Fortas was nominated in 1965 by President Johnson to be a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. Right? So the person that helped with the voter fraud got promoted. In 1966, though, Abe Fortas accepted money from a Wall Street financier investigated for security violations, and Abe Fortas was forced to resign in 1969. So that corruption caught up with him. Washington Post had an article, How Landslide Lyndon Earned His Name. In 1990, David S. Broder wrote the review. He said, the slimy creature who stole the 1948 Texas Senate election, Lyndon Johnson, driven by a boundless ambition, his career had been a story of manipulation, deceit, and ruthlessness. The morality of the ballot box, in which nothing matters but victory, and any maneuver that leads to victory is justified. Johnson stole the victory in the 1948 race. That campaign was an American classic. Johnson battled a strongly favored opponent to win by the narrowest margins. The 87-vote victory earned him the derisive nickname Landslide Lyndon. Johnson went through an equally breathless battle in the state conventions and the courts to make his clearly tainted victory stand up. And in March of 2006, Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott posted a column on the Texas State Attorney General's website stating, voter fraud is no newcomer to the Lone Star State. 6 decades ago, the votes found in Jim Wells County's infamous ballot box 13 helped Lyndon Johnson squeak into the U.S. Senate in that 1948 primary. So, some of the headlines we're seeing today reflect the same type of maneuvers, but they have had a chance to polish him up quite a bit, and they have been getting cover from the media. And unfortunately, networks that used to be reliably conservative now tend to cover for the fraudulent activities. So, did you get anything out of that? Was that worth my time going through that? Did you find that? Okay.
To echo what Bill said, I hope you got something out of that. But it does show that voter fraud is not something new. It went all the way back to 1948 with Landslide Lyndon. Now, Lyndon Johnson becomes the vice president, and then when JFK gets assassinated, he becomes president. The interesting part of that story that you can find on AmericanMinute.com is that there was going to be an expose written and published just 2 weeks after JFK's visit to Dallas, just before Johnson became president. So, you find that very interesting. I highly encourage you to look at AmericanMinute.com. Our next segment, we will go into socialism and dive into the principles and things that are covered in the book that he showed in this video. And I hope you enjoy that and come back to join me then for that segment. Till then, have a good day.